So for this unit, we're going to look more at the kind of policy, the day-to-day runnings of the government. So specifically this week, we're going to be focusing in this video on policy and kind of how policy gets set. And we're also going to look at a little bit at taxes, which also plays a part in the sustainability. And again, just how state and local governments sort of operate and kind of run. So make sure you read through the text as well as kind of put the video together. And over the next few weeks, this will all kind of be coming together and playing out in different pieces. All right, so basically public policy is what the government is doing. It's what they choose to go ahead and do based on what either those in power or those citizens, depending on the type of government and how they're setting it up, decide. And so really what it is it's government's attempt to solve some sort of a collective problem, right? So we need government whenever a problem affects multiple people across different areas. And so you can't resolve it on your own. You need a larger body, or a whole group of people working together to solve it. Of course, that's easier said than done. And there's a lot of difficulties with solving public problems. One, not everybody even agrees there is a problem, right? So what is viewed as a problem for one person or one group is not viewed as a problem by another group, or maybe a different problem is greater. So the first problem is just, again, deciding what is the problem and what problem should be resolved and fixed by the government. The second is that it takes a lot of money. So that we'll talk a little bit more about where that money comes from, but it takes a lot of money to solve these problems. Again, if it was cheap and easy, it would be done very quickly, very easily and quickly. But most of these are going to be very, going to the next one, right? Complex problems. And so because they're complex, they often require a lot of money. And even without the money, right? If they were easy to fix, then we wouldn't really need governments to step in and do it, right? We wouldn't have to resolve it. And often they're hard to fix because there's not always an agreement, not even on whether or not there's a problem, but what is the specific cause, or what is the root cause of the problem. So there can be disagreement on both, is there a problem, and then disagreements on, so even when we think there's a problem, right, a disagreement on what is the cause, or what is the underlying thing that's causing or driving this problem. And so that all adds to this complexity, as well as, again, what is the best solution. So again, even if you agree there's a problem, you'd agree on what the cause of the problem is, you may not get everyone to agree on what the best solution is, right? And have a lot of different views on that. So that's what makes these very complicated. Again, at the local level, and then it gets, every level you go up, it gets even more complicated. But I mean, they're complicated at the local level, and then definitely more complicated at the state level, where you're talking about a much wider and much broader range of people being affected by these policy decisions. So when you look at public policy, you should also consider the different types of public policy. And these can be helpful because a lot of times these will also make differences in what people like or don't like, because they may like some types of public policy over others. So you have redistributive public policies, and these shift resources from from the haves to the have-nots, right? So redistributive policies take resources, usually money, from those who have it, for the wealthier, and then redistribute it to those who have less or who don't have as much. There's distributive. These are usually benefits that go to a specific group. So an easy one here, that's a very broad one, would be like education, right? Education is a distributive public policy. It only affects those with children or the children themselves, right? So not everybody, but again, that's an example of a very wide distributive public policy. And then there's regulatory public policies. And these are kind of designed to change behavior. So we've seen quite a few of these in recent years with taxing, right? Certain things. So like cigarettes, alcohol, things like that get taxed at a higher rate than your food and groceries and things like that, with the idea of trying to, again, regulate behavior, make it a little harder for people to get them. And so that's another way that public policy can be enacted. So these are the three different types and ways that public policy can be enacted in a way. And again, usually one of these three is taking place at any given policy that's out there, providing a benefit to the public. All right, so how is public policy getting made? Like, who's involved? So obviously, the three branches of government that we just spoke about in Unit 2, we're going to talk about bureaucracy here coming up in this unit. So that's like inside the government. And again, that's at the state and the federal level. And then it's also those outside the government. So we talked a little bit about this also in Unit 1. So interest groups, the media helps influence it, and then the public has some in fact impact on it as well. So the picture I have here is looking at the federal, because they didn't have a version for the states, but again, instead of congressional committee, just any legislative committee, because this is true at both the state and the federal level. Sometimes with policy, there's also often what's known as an iron triangle, which is it's a working together of legislative branch, interest groups, and then the bureaucratic agencies who are all influencing. So most legislation is actually written by interest groups or outside parties. They will sometimes work with bureaucracies or agencies, but they are often the experts in that area. So most of our legislation is actually being written by those in the interest groups outside of the government. Again, that's where you get that sort of iron triangle idea of, again, these interest groups influencing by writing the policies, they're influencing legislation. They're also working with the agencies, influencing them on how it's regulated and worked out. And of course, they're being asked for that help from both of those areas as well. Okay, so the policymaking process is fairly important, keeping in mind, especially at the state level, most policies that are written are fairly vague in general. There might be a little better than like at the federal level, but they are written pretty generally, and then often the agencies, bureaucracy is actually helping to implement that. At a local level, ordinances tend to be a little more prescriptive and decided. But as a general rule, this is kind of the policymaking process is, again, that agenda setting feature, which is really determining if there is a problem or issue that needs to be addressed. Then the policy formulation, which is determining the strategies to solve the problem, right? That's where kind of a bill gets determined. And then there's policy adoption. So that's the bill getting actually passed into law. And then policy formulation, which this is where agencies begin to establish their procedures, right? What are the regulations? What are the rules? So again, bills are written and passed by legislation and signed into law by the executive, but it's often the agencies that are really defining the actual day-to-day details of a law that affect us. And then once all that's done, there's a policy evaluation, right? Where you decide if it's working. If not at all, right, they may start all over with a whole new bill. So we saw this with education at the federal level a few years ago, right? You had No Child Left Behind. It didn't really do what it was supposed to. So then you had Common Core. It also didn't really do what it's supposed to. So now we're seeing a whole other kind of, again, dismantling of the Department of Education as a possible solution to our declining test scores and reading ability and math ability in our education system. All right, so kind of going back to those types of policies, again, kind of going through there. So those that are distributive and redistributive are often meant to improve against citizens, right? So they're meant to provide some sort of benefit to people, sometimes like by taking from some and giving to others, sometimes by just giving a benefit to a segment of the population that meets the requirements. So these are known as social policies. Often they're social welfare policies, which means they're usually means tested. You have to qualify in order to get the benefits. They're also often referred to as entitlement programs. So again, a lot of these are regulated, are really set out at the federal level, but states, as a general rule, are given a lot of leeway in actually making them, enacting them within the states, even the ones passed by the federal government. And then, of course, states can have their own welfare policies as well. Again, you see a lot of states like California, for example, having quite a few state welfare policies and programs as well. So another type of policy is economic policy. So just keeping in mind, so social, and then we have economic. So at the state and local level, it's mostly going to be fiscal policies, and this is really mostly at the state, but a little bit at the local level as well. So basically, these are government attempts to solve economic problems. At the state and local level, they're basically, again, they're limited to this fiscal policy, which is regulating through taxing and spending. So, right, they can help affect their local economies, state economies, by their own taxing and spending, right? Balanced budgets, whether there's deficits, whether there's surpluses, and those are all decisions. And we'll talk about budgets later in this semester to kind of go into that, but just to give that idea. There is also a monetary policy, but this is only done at the federal level. And that's regulating the economy by the kind of manipulating both the interest groups as well as the supply of money. So again, this applies only to the federal government, so keep that in mind. But I did think it's important to sort of know, right? That's another economic policy you might hear about. Again, only the federal government has the ability to manipulate interest rates and control the money supply. So states are really limited in controlling economic policy to fiscal policies. So the federal government has a much greater hand in economic policies. All right, and the last one we're going to talk about is tax policies. And like I said, we'll talk about budgets a little bit later, but I do think it's important as this chapter kind of refers to sustainability for state and local governments. That really comes down to sort of tax bases in a lot of this, right? There's limited resources, and you have to decide how those limited resources are going to be spent and what they're going to be spent on, who's going to receive them. So there's 5 different types of tax policies. And you'll see a very wide variety of these among different states. And of course, even the federal government has slightly different ones as well. So there's progressive taxes. So these are income taxes that the percentages progressively get higher based on how much you made. So the federal income taxes that you pay are progressive, right? So you hit certain thresholds, your percentage you pay go up. As opposed to, and I'm going to jump down to the third one there, which is a flat tax. That's everyone paying the same amount, no matter how much you make. So a lot of states actually use a flat tax for their income taxes. Illinois is an example of that. So they actually use a flat tax for their income taxes, and we'll talk a little bit more about why that is. There are also, in between that is regressive taxes. So again, progressive means that the more you make, the more you pay. Regressive taxes is actually the opposite. So the more you make, the less you pay, not necessarily sounding quite as bad as that is, but an example of that is sales tax. So it's not so much that they pay less as an amount, what they pay less is as a percentage. So the reason why it's viewed as a regressive tax is so if 2 people who, so one person makes 100,000, the other person makes 10,000, go into the store and buy $100 worth of groceries, they're each going to pay $10 in taxes. So they're paying the same amount of taxes, but as a percentage of their income, the person who makes 100,000 is paying a much smaller percentage of their income. And so that's why sales taxes are referred to as regressive taxes. Then you also have, and again, and less common, is capital gains taxes, so taxes on investment profits, less so at the state level. And then consumption taxes, which are becoming more popular at the state level. So these are taxes based on what you spend. And then a lot of states also will spend a lot of money and do on property taxes. So obviously education is a big way. Most education in most states is paid through property taxes, right? You choose to often live in a certain community and pay a certain amount to your property based on the school district that you live in and what the benefits of that is. Of course, there's pluses and minuses to that, and we'll get into that a little bit in our discussions, but so those are the different types of tax policies, and again, each one has benefits and or negative consequences, and states have to really choose carefully what mix or selection that they do, because there are consequences to what they choose to select. All right, as I mentioned, a lot of states actually have flat tax rates or do a lot of sales taxes. So I just thought this was an interesting one, so I included the link on the bottom as well. So if you want to dig into this or look at your state maybe in a little more detail. So the states highlighted here are the 10 highest, those in red, who have the highest taxes on low-income houses, and then the yellow are the next 5 highest for the lowest 20%. So again, often these are because they're doing either using a lot of sales taxes or they have a flat income tax rate, and it does that. You do find this often, again, in states because one of the main reasons is because, and we'll talk about that in the discussion post, is because it's easier for people to move out. So the federal government kind of gets away with a progressive tax because you still have a lot of benefits of being living in the United States and being a United States citizen. States don't often have that same benefit, right? And those who make the most money are the most mobile and easiest to move. So they will often move to states where the taxes are the most advantageous to us. So that's why it's harder for states to have that same sort of progressive tax rate that you see at the federal level because of mobility. Those, again, that have the most money are going to be the most mobile to be able to move, and it's to their advantage to move to a state that's going to benefit them the most, right? To keep most of their hard-earned money that they're bringing in and doing on that. And so that's why you see, again, these states, and again, through the middle there, they're kind of things. As across the board, this is true for, again, the states at a state level, there is more regressive taxes than there are progressive, as opposed to at the federal level. All right, so this slide kind of shows some of that as well, the wealth migration. So the high tax states there on the left are the ones that tend to be losing population, and have had fairly steep population decreases. And then on the right, you see low tax states. Most of those, with the exception of probably Alaska, I'm not sure that they have seen an increase in them, more geographical than obviously a result of choosing taxes, right, because of their location. But the rest of those states on that right side have, for the most part, seen an increase in their population over the last decade, with quite a few people moving from those red states to the green states. All right, so just one kind of last thing to highlight on this. So I didn't mention corporate taxes and the different types of taxes, but obviously states also have different policies on their corporate taxes. You see, like Delaware used to be a really big place for a lot of states to incorporate because they had very favorable laws for incorporation, making it easy for companies to incorporate there. But because that environment's changing, you actually see quite a few companies in the last year, especially, really kind of talking about or moving out of Delaware. Illinois have seen quite a few people. Here we go on Texas, for example. Caterpillar is one of those whose headquarters moved from Illinois to Texas. So Texas has been a big recipient of not just populations of people choosing to move there for their like better tax incentives or different policies. Corporations have done the same thing as well. So Texas is a right to work state. That is one of the benefits of why they've seen those. So most of these companies here, like I said, Caterpillar's moved from Illinois, but a lot of these other ones have moved from California to Texas and changed their headquarters there. So obviously, again, states have to be very considerate in what they choose because it is very easy for people and companies. There's a cost to it, right? But the cost of moving has to be outweighed by the cost of the taxes. So again, that's the balancing act that states have to consider when deciding what types and how to distribute those taxes. All right, so I do just kind of like to keep this in mind because this often comes up in the media and different stuff. But just kind of, again, there's lots of different ways you can break up and look at statistics, but I do like this as kind of a visual. So as you can see, in the last couple of decades, actually since 1980, so several decades, those in the bottom 95% of income earners have actually been paying less and less percentage of our overall taxes, while those in the top 1% have been increasingly paying more up until at 2020 that those lines did actually finally cross over. To those at the top 1% are now paying more as a percentage of the overall taxes that come into the government. And I think I couldn't find something that included just the states, or I couldn't tell for sure. So this might be just looking at the federal income, but again, it's the same across the board. States tend to be a little less progressive in their taxes, so you can see a little bit difference at that. The link is on the slide if you are interested in digging into this information a little bit more. So going along with this, just kind of another slide where you can kind of see it sliced up a little bit more. So again, share across all income earned, share of all income taxes paid. So right, those top lines is what share of income earned do those people have in the overall of all incomes earned, and then the bottom is the share of those people in income taxes paid. And again, the main reason for this is because federal government does have progressive tax rates, and so that's what we're seeing here. But again, just to kind of keep that in mind as you do it. So again, you see actually right in the middle there, kind of the top 5 to 10%, not quite the middle color, but close to the middle, that kind of olive green there. They're actually paying, so they're earning the same amount of percentage as they are paying. So again, they kind of hit that middle of the road, probably kind of the worst place to be as far as earning that. And then you see those above that paying a higher percentage in taxes than what they are earning as an overall, and then those below paying a lower one.